The DOJ report on the Albuquerque Police Department found that APD often endorses questionable and sometimes unlawful conduct by officers. In light of this report, correspondent Floyd Vasquez set out to see where APD stands in assessing its response to the death of prominent civil rights attorney Mary Hahn in November of 2010. An investigation by the New Mexico Attorney General's office found the death scene was terribly mishandled due to inappropriate directions from high-ranking police and civilian officials. And the city has spent nearly $79,000 in legal fees defending a civil suit brought by Mary Hahn's family. And in another twist to this story, the private lawyer defending the city in that case is the brother-in-law of a city attorney, David Turek.
Joining us today are David Peterson, General Counsel, Office of the New Mexico Attorney General; Rosario Vega Lin, an attorney representing the family of Mary Hahn in its violation of civil rights lawsuit against the city of Albuquerque; Thomas Grover, a former sergeant with the Albuquerque Police Department and now an attorney in private practice here in Albuquerque; and Brian McCutcheon, a retired lieutenant with the Albuquerque Police Department. You'll note there is no one here from the city. For the last month, we've been requesting an interview with Police Chief Gordon Eden, Mayor Richard Berry, Chief Administrative Officer Robert Perry, and/or a statement of some kind addressing our topic. A spokeswoman for APD said the department cannot comment because there is a civil lawsuit pending. Mayor Berry's office did not respond to our request, so we will play a clip from the mayor's appearance on this program on May 23rd when we asked him about this case. Ms. Vega, let's start with an overview of what this case is about. And for the moment, let's not focus on who Mary Hahn was, because it could have been anyone. Now, on November 18, 2010, there was a 911 call from Mary's home. What made the response to this call unusual?
Other than the fact that it was Mary Hahn, the caller was Paul Kennedy, who, as you know, is a public figure. He was running for state Supreme Court justice. Prior to, he'd already been on the New Mexico State Supreme Court for a while. He called it in as an accidental suicide. He was questioned by the 911 operator. He admitted to seeing Ms. Hahn the night before, twice, once to the 911 operator and the other to the fire department. And the first responders arrived to the scene, and then everyone else arrived to the scene. We're talking higher level police officials, deputy chiefs, lieutenants, commanders, and there was an invasion of Ms. Hahn's home, which is unheard of.
Well, who ruled it a suicide and why?
Based on our investigation, the individual who first started saying that it was suicide was, at the time, Commander Feist, who was then promoted to deputy chief within a month.
Okay. Now, Mr. Peterson, Mary Hahn was no ordinary citizen. She was a well-known civil rights attorney, and she had recently sued APD in a high-profile case. And the people who showed up at her home and essentially contaminated the crime scene were top APD and City of Albuquerque officials, including then Public Safety Director Darren White and the current City Chief Administrative Officer Rob Perry, who was the city attorney at the time. What did the AG's office investigation find?
Our review led us to conclude that this was handled in a manner that was totally outside any usual and recognized procedure or protocol for handling an unattended death. And quite honestly, there were people there for both in the police administration and in the civilian administration that had no real business being at that scene. And I think, unfortunately, what occurred was the scene, they contributed to the contamination of the scene. And I think the way that it was handled is an illustration of a culture that grew up in the Albuquerque Police Department that, if not encouraged, was certainly condoned by the highest ranking officials both in the police and in the civilian authority in the city. And to be honest about it, it was done at best with callous indifference to the feelings of Mary Hahn's friends and family, and perhaps even worse, that it was a ghoulish, sophomorific frat boy atmosphere of allowing people to take cell phone pictures of a death scene that certainly did not help anyone review from an evidentiary standpoint what had happened. And what that ultimately did was it makes it almost impossible to ascertain with certainty what really occurred to Mary Hahn.
And is there a continuing investigation, and if so, what is the status?
Yes, we picked it up after the fact. We reviewed all of the paperwork that we could obtain from the Albuquerque Police Department. We also obtained the investigatory reports. The New Mexico State Police did a rather brief investigation, and we worked with the Federal Bureau of Investigations to review all the material that we could gather, including the autopsy findings from OMI and some additional interviews and other documentation that should have been reviewed before anyone decided what the nature of this death was. The calling of it and denominating it or characterizing it as a suicide after less than an hour at being present really has skewed the abilities of anyone to objectively figure out conclusively what happened.
Now, Mr. Grover, you were a sergeant with the Albuquerque Police Department on November 18th, 2010.
Actually, I was a field officer.
You were a field officer, and you were present at the crime scene. What was going on at Mary Hahn's home when you arrived that day?
Myself and another officer arrived as secondary support or backup units to the two primary officers that were there. And when we got there were those two officers, and I recall an acting supervisor at the time. And myself and the officer that brought me there, we went into the garage, saw where Mary was positioned, saw the state of her car, and then we did what's called a walk through the residence to just do a quick survey of the scene to see if there's anything that stands out as being overtly suspicious or signs of violence or anything that would seem sort of as if there'd been an intrusion or an overt act of crime. And we didn't see that on that walkthrough. Coming back out of the house is when I noticed that there was this sort of conflagration of people arriving that weren't, you'd never see on a regularly dispatched call, even with an unattended death. And I went back to Mary's car and went to look inside to see if there was anything inside of it. And I noticed all the windows were down, which struck me immediately as rather odd because having responded to vehicle-based suicide calls, that's not what you'd find. Usually they're rolled up and people are really sort of sealed and contained in the car. But I looked in the car, and then a supervisor told me that a call out had been made and that FIs were coming and that we were to back out because the scene was being sealed. So we did, we backed out, and I went to the car that I was brought in and we waited. And I remember being there and seeing the current director of the APD's Real-Time Crime Center, TJ Wilhelm, walk by in front of our car. And I remember seeing the current CAO, Rob Perry, there. And then I saw Public Safety Director Darren White there. And it astonished me with the degree of presence that was happening. And I told the officer that I was with, because she had prior counsel with Mr. Perry, so she had that ability to reach out and talk to him. I said, whatever's going on here needs to stop. This scene needs to be sealed. And she reached out and called him and spoke to him directly and said that this needs to stop. The scene needs to be sealed. And at that point, we were isolated from it, and it just deteriorated. But my last impression was that it was being sealed, even though there was this presence of higher level officials. Later in that evening, I found out that it hadn't been sealed, and it had been ruled a suicide, which just caught me out of the blue when I heard from other officers that had heard about what had happened at the scene just through the grapevine of APD.
Mm-hmm. And it must have been very difficult for you because Mary Hahn was a friend of yours, so making it all the more difficult. Now, Brian McCutcheon, you were a lieutenant with the Albuquerque Police Department.
Yes, I was.
How should have this scene been handled?
Well, when the officers initially arrive, they make their assessment. Any witnesses at the scene, which in this case would have been Mr. Kennedy, should have been at least detained temporarily in order to be interviewed and to find out what happened. That's one thing that never occurred. He was actually released from the scene by a ranking officer against the objections of the officers who were present, saying, we were unable to speak to him. We don't know what he saw or what happened when he got there. They allowed him, they said, don't worry about it, it's not necessary, and they let him get in his car and drive away. There was also property that was released to Mr. Kennedy's custody without proper process or documentation of that, and that was done by Deputy Chief Banks at the time.
I mean, is it extraordinary that so many commanders and civilian administrators would be on a scene like that and walking through?
Johnny Tapia, an international figure in the boxing community, had passed. As in a true comparison, we only had one sergeant at that scene, nobody of a higher rank. I had been notified, I notified the deputy chiefs and the chiefs that Johnny Tapia had passed. Nobody had shown up, and so, you know, that was it. They had, 30 people from the neighborhood show up. It was easily contained away from the house. The scene was cleared. The house was completely emptied. People were held there. They were very respectful, but as far as department personnel, highest ranking was a sergeant.
An APD spokeswoman said that she would check into the unattended death practices in the department, but we have not received that information. Now, this question is really for everyone. The DOJ report did not include a reference to the Mary Hahn case. But do you see the report as relevant to the investigation and the call for reform?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think when you look at the DOJ's report, they identified two patterns of practice that APD is in violation of. And those two patterns are that they use deadly force in a manner inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution, and they use less than lethal force in a manner inconsistent with the U.S. Constitution. Now, those two patterns don't have any direct application with what happened at this incident, but it's the things that have led to those patterns that do. And again, from the DOJ report, there's basically three elements that have led to those the development and the existence of those patterns. And from the report, it's insufficient training, policies, and supervision of personnel, systemic deficiencies in oversight, training, and policy, and failed implementation of an internal accountability system. And it's the combination of those elements that have endorsed the kind of behavior that happened at Mary's scene and has led to the DOJ to find that those two patterns exist. And it's those specific failures that are systemic to the leadership, not so much the officers, but the leadership of the department and the leadership of the city that not only allowed for what to happen at Mary's scene, which is complete egregious conduct, but really sort of fostered it.
And I think, Floyd, it's illustrative of this idea of when your boss's boss's boss tells you it's okay, or you're not to do anything more, the line officers, the responding officers, the lowest level officers who have the greatest duty at one of these scenes also have an obligation to follow the orders of their superiors. And when they see people who are not just their immediate supervisors, but people that are really high-ranking members of the department, telling them they have to handle it a certain way, and that is out of the ordinary protocol on how this should be handled, it raises significant questions as to why there was, at this instance, such a rush to judgment to denominate Mary Hahn's passing as a suicide and not cover all of the evidentiary basis that you would do in order to come up with a much more objective assessment of what occurred.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the news reports, the city has attempted to justify the presence of so many people at the scene. Does the fact that the deceased, or possibly the victim, Mary Hahn, was involved in a high-profile lawsuit against the city of Albuquerque in any way justify the city attorney being in her home and walking around, and the other officials?
Well, quite honestly, as a lawyer, the last thing you want to be in any legal case is a witness. And that's what you become when you end up at a crime scene. That's not the proper role or function of a city attorney or really any attorneys. It just rings hollow, that sort of explanation that merely because Mary Hahn had engaged in not just current but past high-profile cases, both criminal cases and plaintiff civil rights cases against the city, that they needed to have someone at the highest level of the city administration there.
We have many questions we wanted to ask Albuquerque's Chief of Police, the Mayor, or Chief Administrative Officer. As I mentioned earlier, the spokeswoman for APD said they cannot comment on the case because there is pending litigation. We also asked the Mayor's spokespeople if he or Rob Perry, the Chief Administrative Officer, would be part of this discussion or if they would send a statement, but we did not get a response. We did ask Mayor Berry a question about this case during a May 23rd interview for New Mexico in Focus. We divided the short clip into two parts. Here's clip one.
Not familiar with what the legal department is doing with that. You know, the mayor doesn't run these investigations, the police department runs them. I believe there's still a lawsuit by the family that's pending out there. I know our legal department is working through that. But you know, I don't think that the two connect to the Department of Justice. So what I'm working on at this point in time is I'll let the legal department work with the family through their lawsuit on that particular case.
Ms. Vega, it's not unusual for parties involved in litigation to decline to comment on the details of the case. But do you feel the city's legal department is working with the family through this lawsuit?
Before we did anything, we knew that there would be some problems because we had so many city administrators present, and obviously Mr. Kennedy was an important figure in Ms. Hahn's life for many years. They were partners for over 20 years. With that in mind, we did approach Mr. Perry, and we did ask if he would be willing to sit down and to engage in discussion as to the Hahn family concerns. His response was, this case would not be any different from any other case, and that we could sue him. So our attempts to negotiate or to mediate or even to have discussions before anything was filed in any court were met with sue me, and unfortunately that's the route we had to take. We have not engaged in any mediation or any attempts to mediate this case with the city, nor has the city actually wanted to engage in mediation. It's on the public record, there was a request from the city that the court order mediation, but that didn't come about, that never came about. So I don't know exactly what the mayor means by working with the family, but that has been our experience. There hasn't been any attempts to work with us. They did file 2 motions to dismiss, and that's entirely the city's right. And we responded, and it's currently pending before the judge. And the judge will decide when she gets an opportunity to, I'm sure.
Okay. Now let's look at clip number 2.
So we know we had some effect. But now, we're very energized as a community. The conversation in the community right now is getting better and better and better. And it's getting better because we're bringing different sides to the same table. And I just really want to put all my energy and effort into that from the policing standpoint at this point. And that's why I am optimistic.
Now, the mayor has heard about the sit-in in his office, the attempts to make a citizen's arrest of Chief Eden, the city council takeover, the recent big march. But there have been a number of initiatives announced since this interview, including community policing councils. So is the conversation in the community right now getting better and better and better, as the mayor says?
Well, I think at least there's some dialogue. It takes obviously all the different stakeholders to be willing to sit together and discuss it in a civil manner, as opposed to just ignoring each other. So from our perspective, we certainly encourage that, and we hope that will continue to take place, because you really have to have, Floyd, the confidence of the general public in order for police agencies and prosecutors to be able to do their jobs effectively. If the general public doesn't believe that you're doing your job either well or competently or honestly, the whole justice system falls apart. And you know, our perspective is, and you asked me early on, do we still have an open investigation? Yes, we do. And my final request to your viewers would be, if there is anyone who has any information that they think might even remotely assist us in finally resolving and definitively resolving what happened to Mary Hahn, we certainly encourage them to bring it forward.
Let's talk about what will it take to reestablish trust, and starting with the police department, what is it going to take to reestablish trust in this case, and as it relates to the wider effort at reform within the Albuquerque Police Department?
Well, from my experience with the department, I can't find anything greater to reestablish that trust than transparency. And that's full transparency. When people are coming and asking questions, some of the high-ranking officials that are there, deputy chiefs, even the CAO, need to step up and answer those questions as fully and completely as possible. Constantly they're being met with anybody asks a question. Having spoke to a family of a victim with an officer-involved shooting case, they went to the chief, they went to the mayor, the father, and said, will you please talk to me about what occurred? We don't know what happened. It was met with resistance and absolute refusal to discuss it with the family of any type. And so the family was left with no other option but to go to litigation. And so it's things like that that foster mistrust, because how can you, if I ask you a question and you're not able to answer it, or you refuse to answer it, yet you're the one who's in authority and supposed to have that information, how am I to trust you? How can I not think there's something suspicious or malicious that's going on?
Mr. Grover?
You know, a department, specifically a police department's legitimacy, comes from the amount of trust that it has from its community. And that trust is engendered by how much accountability and how much transparency the department is with that community. And despite the representations of this department's administration and the city administration, there isn't anything that I've seen that engenders that trust. We've seen emails going out to all the personnel, restricting them from having any conversation with DOJ personnel or U.S. Attorney personnel or FBI personnel. We've had them essentially sequester themselves during any of the DOJ-related negotiations for the consent decree. So while they talk about having a communication, and in all due respect to my fellow panelist, Mr. Peterson, I think they're making the representation that, yes, there's communication going on, but I don't see anything that supports that. In fact, I see them sort of really hunkering down and bunkering inside sort of a siege mentality. And the DOJ report was very specific in identifying that there's been significant deficiencies in leadership in this department on a wide spread of the spectrum, from failing to implement policies to just anemic review mechanisms. So, until there's that transparency, until there's that willingness to step up and come clean and hold themselves accountable the way that they've held other officers, you're not going to see the fostering of that trust evolve and regenerate, which is a crucial element of the legitimacy that defines a good police department. And there isn't anything that supports that they're moving in that direction right now.
Ms. Vega.
I agree. I mean, like I mentioned, we tried to come to the table. We tried to engage in dialogue before anything was filed with any court, and the response was no. And they didn't, the city, and by they I mean the city, didn't give us an option. And when litigation is your only option, there's something wrong with that.
Final thoughts, Mr. Peterson?
Well, I guess the bottom line of this is that, and I think when we started, Floyd, the idea was, well, Mary Hahn was not obviously an officer-involved shooting, and that's the whole subject of the DOJ report investigation. Was the handling of Mary Hahn's case somewhat symptomatic as to what led to the DOJ investigation? And I think certainly everybody here that's on this panel would say yes. And it was an illustration of a willingness to allow a culture to be created in the police department, and that culture was from all the way up at the top, and that culture was fostered, if not encouraged, it was certainly condoned by the city civilian administration. And it really is setting up kind of an us and them situation between the police and the community. And that's just something I would certainly agree with Tom and with Lieutenant McCutcheon about, that's totally destructive to the police being able to do their job well and for our public safety. You know, the police have to rely upon the support of the community to be able to do their jobs and do their jobs effectively. And I think in this modern era, I think the idea that you can or should hide things, even if mistakes are made from the public and the media, I'm sorry, I think that era has passed, and that the best procedure to follow is the old Oliver Wendell Holmes idea that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Let everything be done in the open, let everything be fairly and objectively reviewed, and that's the healthiest thing that we can have as a society when we're talking about effective public safety.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you all very much for being here.